Good day, everybody. Welcome to another episode in the Horus Heresy from the Beginning series. Today we'll be taking a look at everybody's favorite thing to see on the table, vehicles. Vehicles run a very complicated line of rules. They act almost completely different from infantry, and so we'll be dedicating an entire episode to their function. The very first thing we'll be covering is possibly the simplest, armor values and hull sections. Armor value works a lot like toughness, but it has one major difference. When you're trying to wound it, you're going to roll a d6 plus your strength against a much higher than average toughness. What this means is that armor values, referred to as AV, range from 10 to 14. When you roll to wound, you're instead rolling for penetration. This process is similar to wounding in that you'll roll a dice, but you'll be adding your strength to that roll. Say you have a weapon strength of 9, such as a las cannon, going into the front hole of a saber, which is AV 12. Let's say that for demonstration purposes you rolled a 3. This is good. This is called a glance. This is because you rolled your penetration roll equal to its armor value. You do 1 damage to its hull, which is its wounds pool. Most small vehicles, in my experience, have about 3 hull points. Note they don't get a save. A tank relies on its armor value, not a saving throw. Tougher tanks have higher armor values, such as land raiders, such as this one, or Spartan assault tanks. Now, what would have happened if you had rolled higher than its armor value? This is called a penetration. The armor of the tank couldn't withstand that shot as it pierces through its rough hide. Not only do you do 1 whole point of damage, but you also get to roll on the vehicle damage table. I'll be discussing that in a video I'll be posting later today. Moving on, let's talk about moving. A vehicle's shooting will be affected by how it moved, so be careful with how you position your vehicles. All vehicles have a rule called relentless, which means that they can still fire weapons with the heavy, salvo, or ordnance type weapons, like as if they had remained stationary. But with ordnance weapons, it must be on snapshots. I'll be discussing more about weapon types in another video, but for now, know that ordnance weapons can't be fired as snapshots, can't be fired if you move. A vehicle can remain stationary in the movement phase. You can still do something called a pivot, which means you can rotate its vehicle on its center point, which should be roughly in the middle of the vehicle. There are no further effects on this vehicle. Fire away. A vehicle that moved at combat speed moves up to 6 inches. Remember to measure from the hole and leave it to behind the 6-inch mark for combat speed. Using the relentless rule, you can choose 1 weapon to fire its full ballistic skill. No drawbacks, so in this example I'd be firing with the Volkite Saker on my saber here. If you have any other weapons, they can be fired at snapshots, such as my saber missiles or the Volkite caliver. A vehicle moving at cruising speed is going up to 12 inches. And it's only snapshots for you. Choose carefully how you want to move your vehicle. Placement is key, as hull sections can be exposed to things you may not want shooting at it. During the shooting phase, you can move flat out. You immediately move up to an additional 6 extra inches. You can't shoot, but boy, are you fast. And next up, line of sight. Tanks follow a make sense line of logic when it comes to shooting. A weapon can only shoot what it can see on a tank, and unlike in 40k, it has to be able to reasonably swivel towards it. For example, a sponson-mounted weapon, like on a Land Raider, as I'll show here again. So this is a sponson weapon. A sponson weapon can see across its sides, but not any further. So like so. So this weapon can swivel from side to side. So it should be able to see from here to here, but not past here. It's only really going to be able to see from this side of the Land Raider. And same with on the other side, although I haven't assembled the twin-linked las cannons on it yet. I'll keep this here because I still need it for demonstration purposes. A hull-mounted weapon, such as those on the Saber or the Land Raider, are assumed to be able to swivel in a total arc of 45 degrees. There's no need to bust out a protractor, but if your opponent decides to be pedantic, you may need one, although mostly it comes down to common sense. Pintle weapons, like on my Land Raider, have a 360-degree range. You can swivel it all the way around the tank. You can fire at anything within range. Turret-mounted weapons, such as those on a Predator, although I don't have one right now to show you, but just assume this is a Predator. They can fire at anything within a 360-degree arc, like that with a pintle weapon, but it can't shoot right next to itself. You kind of have to assume, like, it can only shoot to about here on each side of the tank. With that in mind, we come to hull sections. This part is simple. Draw an imaginary line between each corner of the tank. These areas are the tank holes, and it determines what unit can shoot at what. Depending on what hull zone you fall under, you may have two different hull zones available to you. Note that if a vehicle is at least quarter obscured to fire, it will gain the benefits of cover. When it comes to templates and blast markers, templates hit the closest hull zone, and blast markers can hit multiple hull zones. Remember, you can't shoot at a tank if all you can see is like a dozer blade or an antenna. Don't be a jerk to your opponent. When a tank is destroyed, don't take it off the table. And unless it's a flyer, in which case it just crashes and burns. But when a vehicle is destroyed, it simply becomes difficult terrain. Keep in mind where your vehicles might become destroyed so they don't block up major pathways. But it's a very interesting part of the Horus Heresy as your game goes on, as vehicles remain on the board as desecrated wrecks just laying on the battlefield, and you have to work your way around it. It's very interesting. When it comes to the assault phase, keep in mind that a vehicle cannot charge unless it's a walker, like this dreadnought, or a chariot, which I do not have to show you, but assume like a Land Raider. Not a Land Raider, a Land Speeder. A vehicle cannot perform Overwatch unless it has the ability to the contrary. When a vehicle is attacked in the assault phase, all attacks go into their rear hull. And it's wounded in the same way as if you were rolling shooting attacks by determining your strength plus a d6 against its armor value. If you penetrate, it instead does 2 hull points of damage. A non-walker vehicle may fight back during its initiative turn, though it only has a weapon skill of 1, but if it's immobilized, it can't fight at all, as it's trying to run over the enemy. Walkers are the exception to this, and I'll probably do a separate video on them. Luckily for vehicles, they are never considered to be locked in combat, and if they survive, they may simply leave combat. If you don't want to move, since you aren't locked in combat, you can just shoot them. This follows the same rules for seeing enemies. You can't shoot what you can't see, and turret-mounted weapons can't shoot them either. Some vehicles have transport capacity. This allows them to carry troops into battle safely, but risks their death if the transport is destroyed. Every transport has a number of models it can carry. This number can never be exceeded, and some models take up 2 slots, such as Terminators. Multiple different units can be embarked within a transport, but a unit can't be partially embarked or embarked in multiple transports. Say, for example, I had this unit of Terminators. I can't just put this guy in there and leave the other guy out. They both have to be in there. And say, for example, I had a Rhino. I can't put one of them in the Land Raider and one of them in the Rhino. They have to be in the same vehicle, or they can't embark at all. While units are embarked, they have Fearless. They can't be afraid if they can't see what they're afraid of. Some vehicles have fire points. This is where a single model can fire out from, following line of sight rules. If the vehicle is moved, they're treated as if they had moved, affecting heavy weapons. And if the vehicle moved at cruising speed, then everyone can only fire snapshots. No one can shoot if the vehicle used smoke launchers or if it moved flat out. Unlike in 40k, A transport has specific access points, and this is where models can leave and enter a vehicle. You can't just throw them all willy-nilly and walk through walls. Any model can embark in a transport if it is within 2 inches of the access point. Just keep in mind that the turn you embarked, you can't disembark until the next turn or until the vehicle is destroyed. When a unit embarks, that vehicle can't tank shock or ram that turn. I'll cover that in another video. A unit can disembark if the vehicle moved no more than 6 inches. Then begins the disembarking process. Place each model one at a time in base contact with each access point. So we'll choose the side access point here. Then move up to their movement value. Repeat the process with as many models as you want until you either don't want to disembark anymore until there's no one left in the vehicle. Remember to maintain coherency of at least 2 inches between each model. Models after that can shoot and cast psychic abilities as if they had moved, but they can't charge. If a vehicle has been assaulted and you can't place your unit within an access point, you can perform an emergency disembarkation. Move as you would with a normal disembarkation, but after that unit cannot do anything else voluntarily. If a transport suffers any damage on the vehicle damage table, the embarked unit can only fire snapshots in the next shooting phase. Otherwise, they'll be fine. If a vehicle is wrecked but not exploded, the unit immediately disembarks. Like so. So within 2 inches of an access point, in this instance, the front access point, but only moves up to 3 inches, so only roughly this far, unless you choose to make an emergency disembarkation. Then take a pinning test, which I'll cover tests like that in a later video. If it explodes, each model suffers 1 strength 4 hit. Have your opponent roll the 2 wound for you. Then take a pinning test. If a zooming flyer crashes and burns, every model immediately suffers a strength 10 AP2 hit. Place them where the flyer used to be and make a pinning test. Be careful with your flyers. And that's all I have for you today in our core vehicle rules. I'll be posting the damage table video simultaneously with this, so watch that when you want. Next up in the pipe is advanced core rules, tests, and eventually I'll get to the psychic phase. But that one's a bit later down the line. But I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.